And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers? Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Big Reed BBQ, Elevate Clothing Line, and Automotive Detailing Solutions of Jonesboro, Louisiana. All of those sponsors can be found on Facebook, and their products can be purchased on Facebook. And the information to get in touch with Automotive Detailing Solutions can also be found on Facebook to set up an appointment to get your vehicle detailed as soon as possible. Now we're going to move on to news and headlines. First and foremost, our thoughts and prayers go out to those affected by the storm in Jackson Parish and the surrounding area in North Louisiana and South Arkansas. Last night, pretty tough storm came through, destroyed several people's homes and property, and we just want to send our thoughts and prayers out for those people. And then also our thoughts and prayers go out to Damar Hamlin for the Bills, a young player, has suffered a hit last night in Monday night's game, about 6 minutes into the game or so. Looked like not even that hard of a hit, and he actually got up and collapsed. And from everything that we've seen and heard, his heart completely stopped on the field. They performed CPR, got his heartbeat back, got him to the hospital. He's listed in critical condition still currently, no new updates, but that did put a stop to the game. They postponed it as they should have. There has been no real updates other than that the NFL and NFLPA have stated that they will postpone the Bengals-Bills game at least through this week, so it will not be played this week. So that kind of puts a wrench in fantasy that, not that that's important here. What's important is this young man's life and his family and what they're going through. But this is a fantasy football podcast, so we're going to talk in relation to that. But our thoughts and prayers do go out to Damar Hamlin, and hopefully he bounces back and makes a full recovery. But in fantasy terms, this will put a halt because there's several large, very, potent fantasy football players from both teams that can make a large impact for fantasy football teams, especially with this being essentially championship week for a lot of fantasy teams. Not very many leagues go into week 18. So, but this game will be postponed. And from what I've read and heard and what I've gathered, when the game is played, if it is played, when it's played, most fantasy leagues, most formats or sites will give the commissioners the option to add those points for those players to the matchup, therefore correcting it when it is played. When that'll happen, we don't know. And, there's been several speculative solutions out there, but none have been confirmed. As we know right now, the Bills and the Bengals game has been postponed. So we're just going to proceed with our injuries and our waiver ads as we normally would. And for week 18 and just go from there. Next on the docket, Saints beat the best team or the best record team in the NFL and also get eliminated from the playoffs at the same time. Asking how? Well, this is how. The Saints beat the Philadelphia Eagles to stay in the playoff hunt, but at the same time, Tampa Bay wins their game and clinches the NFC South. And with the Saints record, they have no chance to get a wild card game, obviously. So the Saints were eliminated from the playoffs this weekend. And last but certainly not least, Green Bay is still alive. Now, you might remember us kind of talking about their chances early on a couple podcasts ago. And apparently everything has been going right for Green Bay. And I think from what I've read, they essentially control their own destiny at this point. So if they end up winning this week, I think they somehow find a way to make it into the playoffs, which is just crazy to me. But Green Bay's still alive, so that's big time for a lot of fantasy players, especially Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, even if you got Robert Tonyan, Alan Lazard, Christian Watson. You know, all these guys are going to be full go for Week 18 if you still are playing. Um, but we're going to jump right on into our injuries. Number one, Derrick Henry was ruled out last week. Rumor is that he could have played if he needed to, but in a strange sense, last week was pretty much a mute game for Tennessee and did not really matter. What matters is this game this week. So they rested him essentially last week to play this game where it's a win or go home for them. So if they win, they make the playoffs. If they don't win, they obviously don't make the playoffs. So Derrick Henry will play this week. CMC or Christian McCaffrey merged with a mild ankle sprain last week. He's listed day to day. Watch for his practice schedule. I believe San Francisco is still alive because they won and some other people lost last week, being the Philadelphia Eagles. So if San Francisco wins and the Philadelphia Eagles end up losing, I believe San Francisco can get the number 1 seed. Which is why they're still alive, and it's even a question that Christian McCaffrey will play with a mild ankle sprain. So look for Christian McCaffrey to probably gut it out. I'm sure he'll be rested heavily this week in practice, but I do expect him to come back and play with just a mild ankle sprain. Third, Jalen Hurts' shoulder was ruled out last week against the Saints. Just giving him more time to get healthy, and also because they've already clinched the playoff spot, but they're still trying to clinch that number 1 seed. This week, they said that is no doubt he will play this week, and it's a must-win game for them this weekend. So Philadelphia is going to be a full go also, which is big time for anybody playing in Week 18. Next is going to be James Conner. Ended up coming out at the third quarter. In the fourth quarter with a shin injury. I believe got some x-rays at the end of the game. They were negative. The coach is calling him day to day, but honestly, they don't have anything to play for. I would think if it's anything remotely limiting or anything that could be remotely damaging to him, they sit him out without a doubt. But right now, just watch his practice schedule, see what happens toward the end of the week, and see what the coaches are saying. Secondly, DeAndre Hopkins ended up hurting his knee in practice on Friday last week and was a game-time decision. Got ruled out right before the game, ended up not playing in the game, and now they're coming out and saying he could be shut down for the remainder of the season. He's another one you just got to watch the practice schedule and updates to see if he comes back to practice. Once again, they don't have anything. They don't have anything to play for, so there's really no reason to bring DeAndre Hopkins back if they don't need him. So if you have him and you're playing, sorry, but I would not hold my hopes to get him back for Week 18. Next will be Tony Pollard. Ended up getting ruled out last week. He will practice Wednesday for sure, and I'd watch for the rest of the week. But given that he was somewhat limited toward the end of last week and close to playing, I would think there's no doubt that he's going to play this week for the Cowboys. But I did see, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I did see somewhere that the Cowboys don't have anything to play for. So it might not be out of the realm for them to sit him and Zeke going to the playoffs, and we might see a lot of Malik Davis, the third string running back there. Next will be Deebo Samuel. Was ruled out with an MCL and an ankle sprain. Still considered day-to-day. Watch his practice schedule. Other than that, honestly, he could come back considering that they're in the mix for the number 1 seed. But I would not hold my hopes out. As dynamic of a player as he is and injury-prone as he is, I would not be shocked if they hold him out to give him as much rest as possible. But watch for his practice schedule to see if they try to bring him back this weekend. Next will be Lamar Jackson. Was sitting out ended up getting ruled out with an knee injury. Didn't practice at all last week when they somewhat expected him to come back and practice last week, but ended up being ruled out last week. Watch for his practice schedule this week. Obviously, they did not win Monday night against Pittsburgh Steelers, which was somewhat of a shock. Pittsburgh actually come out and played well. And if they do need to win, I would be looking for Lamar Jackson to be doing anything he can to get on that field without a doubt. I mean, because they were really a team that was, I guess, projected to perform very well this year, and they have really underperformed. And honestly, if they don't make the playoffs, I would not be shocked if John Harbaugh was on the hot seat somewhat. It would be. I know he's had a lot of success, and he's been in Baltimore for a long time, but with all the hype around their team this year coming in and them not to even make the playoffs, that would be somewhat suspect, although it does have a lot to do with Lamar Jackson being out with injury. But watch for his practice schedule this week. They are expecting him to come back and practice this week. Next, Tua Tagovailoa, out with a concussion. Was ruled out last week, and I completely expect him to be out again this week, and so does Mike McDaniel. Mike McDaniel was interviewed and said, I'm not even thinking about if Tua, not even game planning or thinking about if Tua is going to play this weekend. So it's going to either be Teddy Bridgewater, who had a fractured, dislocated pinky, or it's going to be Skylar Thompson, the rookie third-string quarterback, who has had some success for Miami. So that could be in play as far as a waiver pickup. And then last but certainly not least, Tyler Lockett came back from that finger injury like we thought he might, and then gets a leg injury and ends up leaving the game with a leg injury, comes back, didn't do anything. There's been no updates. So since he came back, he doesn't have an official injury designation at this time. But I'm sure because it's a win or go home scenario also for Seattle. So I'm sure he's going to do anything he can to be on that field as much as possible to try to help them win. So be looking for Tyler Lockett to come back, I would think. But watch his practice schedule. All right, moving on. Jumping right on into our top waiver targets after week 17 with less than 60% ownership in ESPN. You're going to recognize a ton of these names because at this point in the year, a lot of ownership is not changing. So a lot of these guys are still playing really well, and they're not being picked up, in many leagues because a lot of leagues have either ended or people or teams have just gone dormant and just stopped making moves in general. So jumping into our running backs, number one for me is going to be James Cook for Buffalo. Obviously, barring an injury coming out of the Buffalo Bengals game that's yet to be played, I think in Week 18 they are gonna sit Devin Singletary regardless of what happens, because I believe the matchup with Buffalo and the Bengals is all but going to be whoever wins, and then I think there's some other factors with other teams that are involved, but for the most part, I think they end up sitting and resting Devin Singletary. Not to mention James Cook's been getting a lot more work and a lot more opportunities as of late. But he does have a tough matchup. It's going to be at home versus New England. But if they do rest Singletary, that's going to be big. I think James Cook gets a lot of volume in that game. Number two for me is going to be Chase Edmonds for Denver. That's right, Chase Edmonds back on the scene. He got released from Arizona, signed by Denver, and now he's worked his way into a timeshare with Latavius Murray. And what better time to see what you have in a player you signed midway through the season than the last game of the year against the Chargers at home in a very cold Denver environment. So Chase Edmonds last week played one less play than the starter Latavius Murray. This week, I completely expect them to see. They know what they have in Latavius Murray. Now, I think they want to see what they have in Chase Edmonds. He already has almost a 50-50 workload with Murray. I would not think it'd be out of the ordinary to see 60-40, if not 70-30 Edmonds. And also, as many people know, Chase Edmonds is a pass down specialist, so he catches the ball really well. Typically, a lot of teams like to play that into their game plan, getting him a lot of screens and short passes out of the backfield. So I like Chase Edmonds this week at home against the Chargers. Number 3, Jaylen Warren for the Steelers. Did really well, got a lot of work this past week at home against Baltimore. At Baltimore against Baltimore. And that was a tough matchup. This week, a little bit better matchup at home versus Cleveland. Honestly, last game of the year, why not see what Jaylen Warren can do with a full workload? Could be one of those instances where they sit Najee Harris just to see what Jaylen Warren can do with a total workload. But I fully expect this backfield to be somewhat of a timeshare going forward, as well as Jaylen Warren's perform next year. But either way, I like Jaylen Warren, number 3, at home versus Cleveland, getting more work, getting a lot of goal line work also instead of Najee Harris. So like Jaylen Warren a lot. Number 4, last but not least, the guy that's been on here before, Jordan Mason. He's going to replace Tyrion Davis-Price because Jordan Mason came back, played, got 2 carries, including 1 goal line carry for a touchdown. So Jordan Mason getting a cake matchup against Arizona at home. If for some reason CMC ends up not going, or if they end up getting up big, Jordan Mason is going to be the primary beneficiary for the 49ers and get a lot of their work. Even if he's not the primary beneficiary, he's definitely going to be the goal line back if Tyrion Davis-Price does get some work also. So I like Jordan Mason a lot against Arizona, which could definitely be a blowout on San Francisco's side with as bad as Arizona has played and as well as San Francisco's defense has played, as poor as Arizona's offense is. Could definitely be a very lopsided matchup with Jordan Mason getting a lot of extra run at the end of that game. And then last but certainly not least, if any big-time starters are getting rested for the playoffs, be on the lookout for their backups. Like Samaje Perine, Khalil Herbert, Alexander Madison, a lot of these guys, which a lot of these teams are still in the hunt, which unfortunately for fantasy, they're on teams that might not even be in the playoffs. So it's not benefiting anybody, but, their backups aren't getting any run either. So it makes it a little bit tougher. But, be on the lookout for those guys. And then moving on to our wide receivers, number 1 still Jahan Dotson for Washington, still putting up big play after big play, big weeks. Honestly, almost looking like a number 1. I know that's hard to believe with Terry McLaurin there, but Carson Wentz came out and put up a dud and really cost Washington their playoff hopes. They ended up losing that game. Carson Wentz, I believe, threw 3 picks in that game, and I would fully expect Taylor Heineke to come back this week with the Washington being eliminated for playoff contention. And if Taylor Heineke comes back, we all know he's a gunslinger. He's seems like a real competitor, and they're going to be playing at home against Dallas, who has nothing to play for and could very well be sitting a lot of their starters and already has a pretty poor secondary. So I expect Jahan Dotson to have a very good week. And honestly, in a big rivalry game between Washington and Dallas, we know Washington's going to want to go out there and embarrass Dallas and put up a bunch of points to end the year. I think Taylor Heineke is going to be slinging the ball all over the place, and I think Jahan Dotson is going to make some big plays in this game. Number 2 is going to be Treylon Burks for Tennessee. I told you to be on the lookout for him. Honestly, I was not expecting him to have as good of a week as he did last week with Josh Dobbs at the starting quarterback and not Ryan Tannehill. But, 8 targets, 6 catches. Let me double check for y'all here. Let's see. 8 targets, 4 catches, 66 yards, and then 1 rush for 20 yards. against Dallas, which doesn't have a strong secondary. But Jacksonville doesn't have that strong of a secondary either. And Jacksonville can definitely put up some points on Tennessee's defense. I expect Treylon Burks to be heavily involved in the game plan. Played almost entirety of that game against Dallas. So Dobbs looks very competent to get Treylon Burks the ball. I look for him to do very well again if he's out there. Pick him up, play him against Jacksonville, at least as a wide receiver too. Number 3 for me is going to be Rashid Shaheed. You know, he's been on here for several weeks, kind of at the end of all of them, but I got to bump him up now. The dude's produced at least, I believe, the last 4 out of the last 5 weeks. Let me double check for you here. Yes, produced 1, 2, 3 double-digit scoring performances out of the last 4 weeks. Honestly, getting a lot of down-the-field targets, making a lot of big plays, a lot of yards per catch average is very high. You know, and a fair decent chance at a touchdown. This week they're playing at home. Last game of the year in the Dome. You can't tell me that New Orleans is not going to want to go out there and put on a show for their fans. Even though they've been eliminated from playoff contention, I don't care. When you're a Saint and you play in the Dome at New Orleans, especially the last game, it's a pride thing more than anything. I expect them to come to play. And last week, Rashid Shaheed outperformed Chris Olave, who might have still been nursing that hamstring injury. Who knows? But still looked very good. Not saying he's going to outperform Olave this week again, but he's getting enough work to put up enough points to be competitive. And I like him a lot this week at home against Carolina. 4th for me is going to be Isaiah Hodgins for the New York Giants at Philadelphia. Don't get me wrong, it's a tough matchup for Philadelphia, who needs to win the game. And the New York Giants do not have to win. They don't have anything to play for, so they might be resting a lot of their starters. But there's 2 starting wide receivers ahead of Isaiah Hodgins in Darius Slayton and Richie James. And if anybody gets rested in this game, it's going to be them. And Isaiah Hodgins will end up being the number 1 wide receiver, which means he's going to get volume. And as we say all the time, volume is king. So if Isaiah Hodgins gets 10 targets, even if he only gets 5 catches for 50 yards, that's 10 points right there and a chance at a touchdown. You could definitely do worse in your flex. And not to mention, Hodgins has been a big-time red zone target all year. Always seems to be getting open when needed. So I like Isaiah Hodgins a lot this week at Philadelphia. Number 5 coming in for me, KJ Osborne. Underwhelmed week before last. Underwhelmed. This past week was the number 2 scorer for Minnesota. And you would think Justin Jefferson was number 1. That would not be correct. It would be a guy named Josh Naylor, who is 0% owned in all leagues. And that was only because he had 2 really big plays and a touchdown on 3 catches. So I do not think Josh Naylor is somebody to be picked up, but I still think KJ Osborne needs to be picked up because he put up about 18 fantasy points. Let me double check that for you here. Yes, he put up 18.9 fantasy points this past week, 7 catches for 59 yards and a touchdown at Green Bay. This week, he gets a very poor Chicago offense at Chicago defense secondary specifically at Chicago. Not the best weather conditions, but Minnesota still needs to win. It's a plus matchup for him. He's been more involved than he ever has all year here toward the end of the year. I expect him and Justin Jefferson to get a lot of work and have a lot of good opportunity at some big plays this week in a game that they really need to win. Number 6 for me is going to be Russell Gage, the number 3 wide receiver on the team, who put up some mediocre points. I believe he had around 9 points this past week. I think it was like 3 catches for 60-something yards. So not a big week, but it's a plus matchup at Atlanta. Also, I fully expect with Tampa Bay with nothing to really play for, they've clinched a playoff berth. I fully expect them to rest Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, probably Tom Brady as well, and Leonard Fournette. But that makes Russell Gage the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. I fully expect him to have a great game at Atlanta, no matter who the quarterback is, whether it's expected to be Kyle Trask if Tom Brady doesn't play. But honestly, Tom Brady could go out there and say, I want to play, rest the other guys. I want to keep my edge, and let the other primary players rest. And Tom Brady still plays. I don't know. Who knows? But I do feel like Russell Gage is going to be that number one wide receiver out there for the Buccaneers next week. And that's going to wrap up my wide receiver segment. We're going to roll right on into our tight end, or AKA lawn dart segment, as I like to refer to it. And number one for me has got to be Taysom Hill. Yes, a guy that we've almost completely forgot about, and honestly has probably slipped through the cracks for me on this show. I don't know what his roster percentage has been the last couple weeks, because I really honestly have not been seeing him as high as it looks like he has been. But he's rostered at just at 45% of leagues right now, and he has put up at least 11 fantasy points in the last 4 weeks for the Saints, and really has a really nice rushing floor with at least 7 rushes for the last 3 weeks. So it seems like they're getting him a lot more involved in the running game. Last week, he had 14 carries for 46 yards, including a rushing touchdown, and he had a pass completed last week at Philadelphia. So they've got him heavily involved here at the end of the year. I know they've been eliminated, but I don't see any reason why they don't continue to keep him highly involved. And they're playing at home against Carolina, who doesn't really have anything to play for either. So Taysom Hill, number one for me at home versus Carolina. If he does qualify for a tight end position in your league, pick him up, start him. He has a really solid rushing floor. Honestly, I think he's the best tight end that's available out there in a majority of leagues. Number two for me is going to be a guy that's been on here the last several weeks, Trey McBride. Really came through last week, was the number one tight end in fantasy last week, I believe. Let me double check that for you, but I was looking it up earlier today, was really surprised, but really happy to see that. Let's see. Nope, I lied. I apologize. Dalton Schultz, Mark Andrews, then Trey McBride. Trey McBride comes right in 4 points less than Dalton Schultz at the number 3 tight end this week, but nonetheless, 10 targets, 7 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown against Atlanta. This week he plays at San Francisco. So not as good of a matchup as it was last week, but still, the way to attack San Francisco is through the air, specifically the wide receivers, but the tight ends have had some success. And also, this could be a game where Arizona's playing from behind a majority of the game, so they're going to have to be throwing the ball. And if they're playing a younger, inexperienced quarterback, honestly, like we've talked about before, a younger, inexperienced quarterback, the tight end is a safety blanket, which is why he's getting peppered with so many targets. I expect him to get plenty of targets again this week, even at San Francisco against a tough matchup. Moving on, number 3 for me, Tyler Conklin, the best pass catcher for the New York Jets last week, which the New York Jets had a very poor offensive showing last week in general. Really let down a lot of people who started a lot of Jets, but this week should be a very plus matchup. Even though they got eliminated for playoff contention, it seems like the Jets were really making a comeback, and I think they're playing for pride. I think they're going to want to put a good showing at that they've really turned this team around on this last game. They're playing at Miami. Should be some decent weather for them. It's a plus matchup for the entire offense for the Jets, but I think specifically Tyler Conklin, he's been getting plenty of targets. He out-targeted all the wide receivers last week, so I don't think it could be out of the norm for him to do that again this week. So I like Tyler Conklin at number 3 for tight end. Number 4 for me is going to be Jawan Johnson for the Saints. Like I was just talking about, our guy Trey McBride was number 3. Jawan Johnson kind of sneaks in there. He's not quite as highly ranked, but on the year, he's ranked at number 9, had 11 11 points last week, 7 targets, 5 catches for 62 yards last week. Didn't get a touchdown, which is highly unusual, but 7 targets. See, I mean, you can't really hardly beat that, especially when he's highly involved in the red zone like he is, and you have such a good chance for a touchdown. And this week he's playing at home against Carolina. It's kind of a tougher matchup. Carolina's pretty rough on tight ends, but he's a red zone touchdown machine. That's about the best way you beat a team that's really tough on tight ends is scoring a touchdown with your tight end, and I think he's got a good chance. So he's my number 4. And last but certainly not least, due to injury, Greg Dulac, or Dulich if you say it how it's spelled, but I believe it's pronounced Dulac, was placed on IR, and Albert Okawangbanam, or what a lot of people say, Albert O for Denver, ended up starting the game and actually ended up having a fairly successful game for Denver. Ended up putting up 13.5 points, 6 targets, 3 catches, 45 yards, and a touchdown at Kansas City. This week, he's playing against the Chargers. I think they're going to be playing from behind a majority of this game, which means they're going to have to pass the ball a fair amount. This is one of those pure volume plays where he was really involved last week. He's a really athletic tight end that had high praise coming into the offseason, coming off the offseason, but really underwhelmed and let Dulac kind of pass him up for the tight end 1. If anything, he's going to have something to prove this week that he was not a complete bust for them. So I like Albert O going into the last game of the year at Denver against the Chargers. And that's going to wrap up my tight end segment. We're going to jump right on into our quarterbacks. Number 1's got to be Jarrett Stidham for me. I mean, honestly, completely blew me away with his quarterback play this past week. We shouldn't really be surprised, honestly. It seems like all these quarterbacks that get drafted by New England are in New England for a little while and then get traded out, go to these other teams and have a lot of success. I mean, for instance, look at dadgummit, I just went blank. Hang on, let me look him up here. I mean, look at Jimmy Garoppolo. Was in New England, staying behind Tom Brady, had a little success in New England, gets traded, goes to San Francisco, and has honestly really good success rate and a winning record for a long time. And then the same thing with Jarrett Stidham, drafted by New England, ends up getting passed up by Mac Jones, then gets sent to Las Vegas, who really like him enough to sit Derek Carr, who we all thought that possibly their longtime franchise quarterback for the last 2 games of the year, and really honestly seemed like aggravate the mess out of him just to play this guy to see what they got. And then he comes out and just freaking throws some bombs. 23 for 34 for 365 yards, 3 touchdowns. Did have 2 picks, but 7 rushes for 34 yards. I mean, that's 40 points, and depending on the scoring in your league, and that, I mean, if it wouldn't have been for some monster games for Tom Brady and Daniel Jones, Jarrett Stidham leads, is the number 1 QB on a lot of weeks this year. And the last game of the year, he gets Kansas City at home, who's probably going to be sitting a lot of their players because I think it does have something to do with the Bengals-Buffalo matchup. But even so, Kansas City's defense is terrible. And if he did that against San Francisco's defense at home, I'm really anxious to see what he can do against Kansas City, who's bottom of the barrel defense at home. With Devontae Adams playing, I like Jarrett Stidham a lot. I'd pick him up, fire him up over just about anybody this week. Jared Goff obviously would be on this list at number 1 if he qualified, but unfortunately he does not qualify. But heck, I mean, he just barely passed it, but he had a heck of a week too. And this week he gets to play at Green Bay, which is not the best place to play right now because it's so cold and their defense is playing hot. But I mean, Jared Goff has done stuck in there at the number 7 quarterback on the year, And then we got Daniel Jones this past week, who was one of my picks who barely flies on the radar, but they're saying he might be sitting this week. Comes in the number 11 quarterback after this week, but put up a 40-pointer. So anyway, Jared Stidham played really, really well, and now he gets a really good matchup at home. So I like him a lot this week. He's my number 1. Number 2 for me is going to be Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson. Honestly, with Teddy Bridgewater's hand and everything going on, I hope they don't try to play him because I feel like he would not perform as well as Skylar Thompson could if they just rest Teddy Bridgewater. And I think in their situation, with them not knowing even if they're going to have Tua back, I think it's best case scenario that they end up sitting Teddy Bridgewater and play Skylar Thompson, because if Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt and they do make the playoffs, you're going to be playing Skylar Thompson first round of the playoffs. But I guess they would rather make the playoffs and play Skylar Thompson than sit Teddy Bridgewater and play Skylar Thompson, not make it. Either way, they're playing at home versus the Jets. It's a need-to-win game. They have a ton of offensive firepower. Whatever quarterback starts, I like them to have at least a decent game. And then flip the coin. On the other side, I like Mike White for my number 3. Mike White, the White Knight for the Jets, did not ride in on his white horse and save the day last week. If anything, he fell off the horse before he got there because their offense looked terrible. I look for them to have a big-time bounce-back performance this week at Miami. Shouldn't be a weather problem unless it's like storming or something. But it's at Miami, whose offense has been very underwhelming this year, and especially their pass defense. And not to mention the Jets just have a plethora of weapons to put in the, to make plays, which helps Mike White out a lot. So they're playing for pride. I like Mike White a lot this week. Number 4 for me is going to be Brock Purdy, another quarterback that is more of a, I guess you could say, a product of his weapons than he is him performing himself. But I like Brock Purdy this week at home versus Arizona. Like we said before, San Francisco still has something to play for, a plus matchup at home, plenty of weapons for him to get the ball into their hands and make big plays. I like Brock Purdy a lot this week at home versus Arizona. He's a little banged up, so watch his practice schedule, but I like him a lot this week. And last but certainly not least, Hercules Taylor Heineke. Yeah, that's right. I got a new name for him, Hercules Taylor Heineke. The dude got sat. They bring in Carson Wentz to save their season and get them to the playoffs. I don't know why, because it seems like Taylor Heineke just the troops rally behind him, the players rally behind him. But they sat Taylor Heineke, start Carson Wentz, who they signed for that long-term deal, and ends up Carson Wentz lost him the game. I just feel like there's no way that you run Carson Wentz back out there after he cost you a trip to the playoffs, and it seems like Taylor Heineke got you to that point, and you sat him. This week, he gets a plus matchup against Dallas, who doesn't have anything to prove, and Taylor Heineke and Washington's playing for pride. Feels like Taylor Heineke has something to prove that they shouldn't have sat him last week. So I think he comes out with a chip on his shoulder against a rival. All of his playmakers are back, including Logan Thomas, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin. I like Taylor Heineke a lot this week if he starts. If he doesn't start, obviously, no, but there's plenty of options for him. Somebody should be available. But I do like Taylor Heineke a lot this week. Then moving on, that's going to round up our quarterback segment. We're going to move on to our DSTs. Honestly, a lot of good options this week, just like last week. Number 1 for me's got to be New Orleans at home in the Dome. Last game of the year, their defense was starting to get healthy. They looked really good last week at Philadelphia. Really good to see Marshawn Lattimore back. Intercepted one and ran it back for a touchdown. So I like New Orleans a lot better this week against Sam Darnold and the, somewhat underwhelming run-heavy Carolina Panthers. The only thing that worries me is that we're not as good at run stopping as we have been in the past, and Carolina runs the ball like 50 times a game. So the good thing about that is it does shorten the game from a time of possession standpoint. So it makes it where there's not as much passing and not as many possessions to go around. So therefore, not as many times that Carolina has a chance to score the ball. But if New Orleans can stop them scoring and shut down Marcus Lattimore, can shut down DJ Moore, I think New Orleans defense and special teams has a really good game at home to finish the season in the Dome. Moving on, number 2 for me is going to be Jacksonville defense, who had a heck of a week last week, and I expect them to keep it rolling this week at home versus the Tennessee Titans with a backup quarterback starting at home. Tennessee's offense has been limited all year with Ryan Tannehill, and Josh Dobbs is not an upgrade. So I like Jacksonville's defense to at least get a couple turnovers and sacks against Josh Dobbs at home. And not to mention, Jacksonville's playing for a chance at the playoffs. So is Tennessee. But Jacksonville just seems like they've been on the cusp of really breaking out all year. And I do feel like that their defense is going to step up at home. And I think they're going to make a lot of big plays for them this week. And then last but certainly not least, the Los Angeles Chargers at Denver. This is a plus matchup for any defense in the league right now. Denver's offense has just been terrible, even with the coaching change. I like the Chargers defense who's getting healthy. They're playing at Denver, going to be probably really cold, tough offensive conditions, and the Chargers need to win. So they're getting healthy. I think it's going to be a Los Angeles Chargers game that's going to be very beneficial for their defense. And then that's pretty much going to round up our DSTs. Moving on to our kickers. I got 4 kickers for you that should have really good weeks this week. As you know, most of them are going to be in dome, but number 1's not going to be a dome. That's going to be Riley Patterson for me for Jacksonville. Has been pretty solid the last several weeks, playing at home against Tennessee Titans, who have a pretty decent run defense. And in most of the times, a decent run defense translates into, it seems like, more 3rd and short and field goal chances. So I like Riley Patterson's shot to get a fair amount of field goals, and it's a must-win game for Jacksonville. So, and their offense is off to a hot start, so I expect them to move the ball well against Tennessee and get into several scoring positions for Riley Patterson to have a chance to put up some points. Not to mention it's in Jacksonville in Florida. Unless it's storming, I don't expect the weather to be that bad. So, and it's at home for him, so it's home field advantage. Number 2 for me is going to be Eddie Pinheiro for the Carolina Panthers at New Orleans. It's in a dome. New Orleans defense has been playing better, getting healthy, and the Carolina defense runs the ball a lot, which can lead to more field goal chances, like I just talked about. And not to mention, Pinheiro has 12 points or more in 4 of the last 5 games. Had another good week last week. I expect that to continue in a dome, so you don't have to worry about the weather. Number 3 for me is going to be Young Ho Koo. Has been on this pod list on and off several times all year. This week, he's playing at home against Tampa Bay, who could be resting a lot of their starters, which gives Atlanta a good chance to move the ball a lot more, gives him a lot more opportunities, and not to mention it's in a dome, so you don't have to worry about the weather, and he's at home, so he's got home field advantage. And then last but certainly not least, for the Saints fans out there, Will Lutz at home versus Carolina. He's been looking better. The offense looked actually fairly decent against a really good Philadelphia defense in Philadelphia last week. This week they're playing at home against Carolina. And I think they're going to get in field goal range a fair amount, and he's going to have his opportunities in a dome. And if I'm Will Lutz, I think this is a job interview for next year because he has not been the best this year. And with his injury history, I would not think it'd be out of the realm of possibility for them to move on to another kicker. So this could be a big-time job interview for him. And that's going to round out my kickers and going to round out my injuries, waiver wire, and podcast for Week 18 or after Week 17, however you want to say it. We really appreciate everybody listening. It's been a great year. this is the last injuries waiver and podcast that we'll have. We will continue to have podcasts. I hope to have some interviews of some people that, in I guess you could say the community of the local area, just general people that I know in leagues, whether I'm in the league with them or they're in other leagues. I'm going to be looking to get some people on that either won their league or had some close matchups, just to get other people's perspectives on that are not on my podcast here or in the Dirty Boot Sports, on the Dirty Boot Sports cast, just so you can hear other perspectives from other players. So, from fantasy players. And then we'll also probably do some previews heading into next year after the postseason kind of winds out for fantasy purposes. But also keep listening to the podcast because we're going to jump right on in. I'm going to do some fantasy basketball coverage. We did not start a fantasy basketball podcast this year. That definitely is going to be in the works for the future, but I will do some fantasy basketball talk. Also, I'm going to do some talk about, we're going to start a fantasy baseball podcast, Major League Baseball. We'll be updating y'all on that, on dates and all that as it comes about, but that won't be until the spring around March time. So plenty of time to talk about fantasy football for next year. But we appreciate all the listeners. Please like, subscribe, follow, download. The podcast is not going to end with fantasy football coming to an end. We're just going to transition to other sports because if most of you don't know, I play in fantasy football, I play in fantasy basketball, and I play in fantasy baseball. I've been playing in multiple leagues in all those sports for several years, and I'd like to just continue to keep talking about fantasy sports in general. So this podcast will not end when football does, even though we might stop talking about football for a short period. But we appreciate everybody. Like, subscribe, follow, download on all your platforms: Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, whatever you like to listen on. And also, once again, thank you to our sponsors: Big Reed BBQ, Elevate Clothing Line, Automated Detailing Solutions out of Jonesboro, Louisiana. We appreciate y'all backing us up and sponsoring us. And good luck if you are playing. If you rounded out your fantasy playoffs championship already, congratulations if you won. If you didn't win, there's always next year, and we appreciate you listening. Good luck in week 18, and we'll be coming back at you next week to kind of wrap up and have a post fantasy football wrap up, as you might say. So we appreciate everything, and y'all have a good one, and good luck in week 18 if you are playing.